Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Today I have decided to take an online class on Renaissance philosophy. We all are going through a very difficult time. All of us are facing the problems of the pandemic, and in these uncertain times, for most of us it might be difficult to join the live classes. That's why I have decided to shift on to this mode of YouTube live, so that I can reach a greater number of audience, and my lectures can also be archived in my YouTube channel. Yes, good afternoon, Shomadrita. So you can hear me properly, right? It's yes. You can hear me properly? Okay. Okay. There was a technical glitch last time, but hope it's resolved now. Hope my audio is clear. Please respond whether my audio is clear to you or not. Audio is clear to all of you? Yes, Abira. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Let's go to the discussion that I have planned for you today. Well, I have planned for you the some important points on Renaissance philosophy and Renaissance. When we go back to Renaissance philosophy, the philosopher that we must go back to is Aristotle. Aristotle is one of the pioneering classical philosopher, and we all know that in Renaissance we find uh, the revival of classicism, revival of classical philosophy. Renaissance is actually the rebirth of classical learning. In Renaissance philosophy, there is enormous emphasis on the idea of human self, on the idea of human soul. Aristotle is one of the pioneering philosophers to talk about, to theorize different definitions of human soul. As per Aristotelian definitions, there can be three divisions in human souls. There can be a vegetative soul, there can be a locomotive soul, and there can also be a rational soul. So the three divisions are: first, the vegetative soul, that's related to vegetables, plants; the animal soul, the locomotive soul; and the third one, the rational soul, vegetation, locomotion, and rational. The vegetation soul or the vegetative soul is the soul that acts when we are in the midst of an inertia. Inertia, that means inaction. Sorry, I have a call. So vegetative soul, rational soul, and the rational and the locomotive soul. So a vegetative soul is intrinsic to the idea of plants. Every individual contains, every human being contains the soul of a plant within it, soul of a tree within it. So tree is something that is not independent of us. The plant is something that is not independent of us. We, in our body, in our soul, contain the soul of a tree as well. There is a book by Shumona Roy recently published. You can read that book, and the book is entitled "How I Became a Tree." It's a recent book, and it contains the Aristotelian idea of a vegetative soul. The vegetative soul that is not very active, that is in a state of inertia, that is in a state of vegetation, that is in a state of hibernation. Now, let me come to the point of locomotive soul. The locomotive soul is something that drives our impulses, that propels us towards a journey, towards something that is greater. So, the prana, Ori Bangsa, I remember I talked about Bangsa while discussing modernism with you. Ori Bangsa will will theorize the locomotive soul as the space of human perception. Ori Bangsa will theorize it as the elan vital, the human perception, the elan vital, the vital spirit, the kinetic spirit that every individual or any individual fosters, harbors. So the kinetic spirit and the locomotive spirit, the spirit of perception that triggers, that propels, that drives an individual forward. So there is a question of journey in the locomotive soul. The locomotive soul propels you towards an action, towards something, towards your goal. And number three is the rational self. The rational self is something that governs the other two. If there is no reason, there cannot be a proper direction to the locomotion and vegetation. Kant, in enlightenment philosophy, will talk about reason, but he will ask question about the pure disinterested form of reason. He will obviously talk about the amalgamation between various aspects of reason. But I am not getting into Kant here. My point is predominantly here is the idea of reason that Aristotle focuses on. If there is no reason, if there is only locomotion, if there is only vegetation, if there is no logismos kaya diaonia, to quote Aristotle, I am just writing it in the chat box, logismos kaya diaonia. This is the term that Aristotle uses. Logismos kaya diaonia, the term for reason. If there is no logismos kaya diaonia, that means if there is no reason, then there cannot be a proper guidance, there cannot be a proper implementation of the locomotive soul and the vegetative soul. The vegetative and the locomotive are the substructures governed by the narrative of reason. So reason is intrinsic to human self, human development. You cannot do anything without reason. So Renaissance humanism will deal with this idea of reason. Reason will shape your locomotion. Reason will shape your vegetation. Vegetation makes you live in inertia. Vegetation makes you live in a state of inaction. But locomotion is the source of prana. Prana, that means the pranoshakti, the power that an individual fosters, an individual harbors within his soul. The prana, the power of prana, that is the vital impulse an individual contains, an individual is driven by. So the question of prana is associated with the question of inertia. Inertia is counterpoised, inertia is balanced by prana. Similarly, prana is balanced by inertia. So action, inaction, inaction, action. Both are complementary to each other. Both interplay to the formation of a human soul. But these concepts of action, inaction, karma, action, inaction should always be governed by a sense of consciousness, that is reason. It can be ethical consciousness, it can be moral consciousness, it can be rational consciousness, any kind of consciousness that Aristotle talks about as reason. Reason is something that acts as a guiding principle to the other two pursuits, other two paradigms of the human self. Clear? So, Aristotelian paradigm of human soul rests on the tripartite division of human psyche, human soul, that is the vegetative soul, the soul of a plant, locomotive soul, the soul of an animal, and rational soul, the soul of a human being, sentient being. And this rational soul, this rationality is comprised of not merely reason, it's comprised of ethics, it's comprised of politics, morals, and so on. So that's how an interplay of different aspects of the human self constitutes the growth of an individual in as per Aristotelian terms, as per Aristotelian paradigm. Right. Now let me come to Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas will talk about Thomas Aquinas is another very important philosopher of Renaissance, and the idea that Thomas Aquinas will talk about is de anima. De anima. That means the actual spirit, the soul of the individual. De anima. I'm writing the quote in the comment box. De anima, the anima spirit. Carl Jung, I am just writing the name of Carl Jung. Carl Jung will talk about the term animus from anima. Anima, spirit, that is intrinsic to an individual self, intrinsic to an individual psyche. And the book that Thomas Aquinas writes is the name of the book is Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica is the book that Thomas Aquinas writes to explain his philosophy. And the book was published in 1256. 1256. Thomas Aquinas. Before that, we get Aristotle. And in Thomas Aquinas' perception, we get several theories regarding the aspects of human self, human soul, human body, man's social position, the idea of monarchy, man's difference from the non-living beings, division of labor, justice, natural law, and other things. So, for Thomas Aquinas, there is a definition between the soul and the body. Again, in the if we when we will read Enlightenment philosophy in the 18th century, we will get to know about a philosopher like René Descartes. And René Descartes will talk about the discrimination or the division between, or the duality between the body and the soul. Sorry, the body and the mind. So the body and the mind. And I know that most of you have done Cartesian dualism while doing your graphs, doing your mathematics in class 11, class 12. Many of you have done that. So I am not getting into that. I am just mentioning the name of Cartesian dualism. And Descartes was actually getting this idea from Thomas Aquinas. James Joyce, another modernist writer, will also refer to Thomas Aquinas in his novel A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. So what was Thomas Aquinas' theory? Thomas Aquinas' theory is man is a social being. Man is not an individual who is isolated from the society. So there is a social element in man's identity, in man's entity. Man is primarily a social being, and man's identity should be community centric. So man should not only live for his own self, man should also live for others. So there should always be an ethical bonding between the self and the other. If the other is slipped out of the circle, if individual becomes too much narcissistic, then what will happen? The chain of relationship the society is based on will totally collapse. And that's why Aquinas talks about the idea of maintaining a reciprocity, a rapport, and a chain through through maintenance of an ethical bonding. Man as a social being. So he in his idea of Summa Theologica, he differentiates between uh, uh, the concept of good man and good citizen. Good man and good citizen. So when you are a good person by heart, that means you are a good person. You are a very law abiding person, or you have a very good heart, you are a very emotional being, and others. But when you are a good citizen, that means you have to be a law abiding citizen as well. You have to adhere to the policies imposed on you by the government. If you flout them, if you want to just dismantle those policies, those ideas, or refuse to believe in those things, then you are not, quote unquote, a good citizen. So the concept of citizenship and the concept of goodness, virtue, comes in the humanist discourse of Thomas Aquinas, who was obviously an Aristotelian thinker, who was obviously a follower of Aristotle. And also, he talks about the idea of individual autonomy. That individual autonomy should be there. The state should not intervene much on the individual space, the space that an individual offers, the space that an individual occupies, that the privilege that an individual enjoys should not be curbed or compromised by the state. The state should be ethical in its action. In his definition, he differentiates between the idea of monarchy and the idea of oligarchy. Monarchy is about the king, and he retains absolute faith in the ethical virtue of a king. The king has to be ethically very correct. The king has to be ethically noble. If there is no ethical nobility in the king, the state is bound to collapse. That's why the question of ethical nobility, the question of ethical premise, is very important in the context of or in the concept of Thomas Aquinas. Ethics should be the primary question, the primary orientation of a state, and therefore the king has to be ethically very noble. Number two, oligarchy. If the power is grabbed by some people who are like who are forming a group or who belong to a particular group, then what will happen? It will ruin the state. The state will be ruined by oligarchy. And that's why monarchy is important. The role of the king is important. Oligarchy will lead to the collapse of the state. So, what is oligarchy? Oligarchy is a state governed by some people, by a group of people. And monarchy is a state governed by a king. So he is retaining enormous faith on the power of king. He is retaining enormous faith on the power of king, on the ethical nobility of a king. If the ethical nobility uh, uh, ethical if the ethical nobility of a king is not if the ethical nobility of a king is compromised, if the ethics of a nation is compromised, then the state is bound to collapse, the state is bound to flounder, the state is bound to languish. That's why he is retaining enormous faith in the ethical nobility of a king. But oligarchy will lead to a conflict of interest rather than a cooperation between different citizens. Also, he is talking about the idea of division of labor that Emily Durkheim will propound in the 20th century. And in this division of labor, he talks about that how labor should be divided among the citizens as per their expertise. If someone is good at mathematics, he should teach mathematics. If someone is good at doing farming, he should do farming. If someone is better uh, in doing economics or maintaining economics, he should do that. So there should be a division of labor. It's everything should not be done by everyone. So he is talking about, his method is very scientific, and he is talking about that there should be a division of labor. There should be an of idea of sorry there should be an idea uh, uh, where different people will do different works. The ultimate aim of the ultimate aim of Thomas Aquinas is the idea of justice. So he is talking about the idea of justice. There should be a justice in the state, and he is keeping his faith in the idea of divinely ordained justice. So Thomas Aquinas' point here is he is thinking about, he is conceptualizing the idea of a religious justice, that justice should be religious, one should maintain Christian ethics, one should not depart from the Christian virtues of the state, and that's why there should always be a highest order of justice, natural law, and so on. And justice of an individual or justice of the state can bring about happiness in the individuals. So I am just giving you all these points about Thomas Aquinas and the philosopher I mentioned before, Aristotle, to know about to highlight the specific relationship that Renaissance shared within this shared among the human being and the state. The human being and the state share a very torturous relationship in Renaissance. Sometimes the human being will try to topple the state. Sometimes the human being will try to supersede the state, that I am the state, I will transgress everything, transgress the authority imposed on you. And sometimes the state will take its course and curb the individual within its fold. And so there will be a tension between the individual and the sorry there will be a tension between the individual and the state in the times of Renaissance. So the justice is the highest order he is talking about. So Thomas Aquinas also talks about the idea of human existence. That human existence is based on three major precepts. They are charity, peace, and holiness. Charity, peace, and holiness. Charity করতে হবে, peace and holiness. If the ethical action of an individual is not proper or improper, then the state or the society is bound to flounder, it's bound to fail. And the ultimate aim that Thomas Aquinas is proposing here is to propitiate God. You have to satisfy, you have to propitiate the divine authority. Otherwise, life is not going to be properly ethical. So his idea of maintaining an ethical order, the idea of maintaining a good citizenship, the idea of retaining a reciprocity between the living and the non-living beings, everything rests on a paradigm which binds human relationships together, and this binding of human relationship eventually leads to the idea of dharma. Dharma is the religion that one serves through action. It's the dharma that Renaissance philosophers are talking about. The dharma of it's the dharma does not mean here religion. It's the religion of action, the religion of ethics. It's not the religion that creates a division between people in terms of their belief systems, in terms of their faith. This doctrine of dharma is intrinsically related, or rather, I would say it's fundamentally based on the idea of karma, where individual action is the governing principle of the religion of faith. So the faith and action should cohere. Faith and action should not remain extricated from each other. This is what Thomas Aquinas is trying to project through his hypothesis. So let me have a glass of water and then I will begin again. Now let me come to another philosopher who uh, who is perhaps one of the most important philosopher of Renaissance times is Lorenzo Valla. Lorenzo Lorenzo Valla. None of them are British philosophers. All of them are Italian philosophers. And Lorenzo Valla's book De Libero Arbitrio, De Libero Arbitrio, De Libero Arbitrio, De Libero Arbitrio. So, De Libero Arbitrio actually talks about the question of liberty and arbitration. Liberty and arbitration. An individual should have some liberty and the power of arbitration. One can arbitrate. So, the question of arbitration, that once you have the power to perform a duty, power to execute something, the power of arbitration, power of arbitration, and sorry, yes, power of arbitration and the question of free will. So in Lorenzo Valla's question, in Lorenzo Valla's idea, we find that man as an agent of the man as an agent of the divine will. Man contains a divine will. Also, man has the power to perform an action with the power of its will. So, man is an embodiment of the divine will, but man is also capable of arbitration. Man is also capable of arbitration. So, arbitration, that means making change in the society with the aid of one's own power, with the question of one's own power, and also embodying the divine self. The divine self, that is invested on you, that is given to you, that is something that one receives from the divine Lord. So that is how Lorenzo Valla brings in the question of free will. Hitherto, Aquinas talks about the question of action, the question of being a good citizen, and also the question of aesthetics, art, and so on. But the question of will is somehow missed in Aquinas' point. And this question of will comes precisely from, or stems precisely from, emanates precisely from the animal soul, or the animal soul that Aristotle talks about. So, animal soul triggers an individual towards an action, towards will, the will to power, the will to knowledge. So, there is the will that an individual inherently embodies or contains within his soul, comes from, or emanates from sorry comes from, or emanates from what? It emanates from the divine impulse that an individual contains. So divinity and individual action both are commingled, both are intermingled in the humanistic philosophy of Lorenzo Valla. Lorenzo Valla's, after Lorenzo Valla, we will talk about the oration on the dignity of man by Pico della Mirandola. Oration and the dignity of man, oration and the dignity, oration and the dignity of man by Pico della Mirandola. Of man, Pico della Mirandola. Pico della Mirandola. So, Oration and the Dignity of Man by Pico della Mirandola. Pico will talk about, will dwell on the question of man's power and importance. Man, in my last class, I remember I talked about the great chain of being, where God is at the center. Then there are angels, then there are individuals, human beings, then there are animals, and then there are plants, and then there are minerals. So this is the great chain of beings. God is at the hem. God is at the top of the great chain of being, the hierarchy. Then there are angelic beings, the angels who are the who are part of God's circle. You will get to know about the angels when you read Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost here in sorry in Paradise Lost by John Milton. Hope you are reading that. You will get to know about the angels, position of angels after God. So first there is God in pecking order. Then there are angels. Then there are human beings. Then there are animals. Then there are plants. Then there are minerals. So this was the order that Pico della Mirandola talks about. And Pico della Mirandola also also expatiates on the amazing capacity of an individual to range itself up to the order of divinity and lower himself down to degenerate himself down to the level of a creature or an animal. So, in the great chain of being, there is a fixed position ascribed to an individual. Fixed position ascribed to an individual. The position that an individual holds is very fixed, is very fixated, is very prominent. It's very monolithic. But Pico della Mirandola, with his question of man's flexibility, man's resilience, talks about that human beings can scale himself or range himself up to the level of divine being, angelic being, or even to the level of a creature. Human beings can philosophize about life. When human beings philosophize about life, he climbs up to the level of a divine or an angelic being. And when human being turns murderer, he will degenerate himself to the level of a creature. If we read Macbeth, when we read Macbeth properly, we will get to know how we will come across how Macbeth, while philosophizing, while articulating golden poetry, while elevates himself, sublimates himself to the level of a philosopher before his death. Again, Macbeth will degenerate himself to the level of a creature when he turns out to and he starts his killing spree. So that's how the position of man is questioned. The position of man is reaffirmed. Wouldn't say questioned. It's questioned and also reaffirmed in the great chain of being. The great chain of being, that is the Christian concept. That was the Christian concept. The Christian concept of great chain of being is radicalized by the intervention of Pico della Mirandola. Pico della Mirandola. And Pico della Mirandola talk about the three qualities an individual can imitate or can derive from the angels. The qualities of charity that belongs to seraphim. Seraphim is an angel. The quality of intelligence and the quality of justice. So charity, intelligence, justice, all three are connected, all three are interrelated in the question of maintenance or sustenance of an order. The question of charity that belongs to seraphim, the question of intelligence, cherubim, and the question of justice, that is throne. So throne should represent the idea of justice. Before this, before this, Thomas Aquinas also talks about the idea of justice, and he also thinks the king to be the absolute arbiter of justice. If there is and there is no ethical nobility in the king, there will not be any justice, any form of justice. That's why the role of king becomes very important in the context of Renaissance. In the next class, I will talk about Nicola Machiavelli, and Machiavelli will talk about the notions of a good king, how to be a good king, the questions of kingship, the questions of being a good ruler. If a good ruler has always has to be, or if a good ruler always needs to be very good at heart, or what needs or rather what are the qualities that one good ruler should epitomize, should embody while ruling a state? What are the ethical qualities? What are the political qualities? One good ruler has to be politically very astute, politically very shrewd, politically very sagacious. And Nicola Machiavelli will talk about the political sagacity, political astuteness, political idea of a ruler. If a ruler is not politically astute enough, the state is bound to collapse. And same thing will happen with King Duncan. Similar thing will replicate in case of Macbeth too. So this is all for today. I have talked about Aristotle. I have also talked about Thomas Aquinas, talked about Lorenzo Valla and Pico della Mirandola, four Renaissance philosophers. I won't call Aristotle to be a Renaissance philosopher, but in Renaissance time, you find a revival of Aristotle's philosophical ideas, philosophical notions. That's why it's very important. it's very pertinent to know what Aristotle thinks about the idea of human soul to read a Renaissance text, because all these ideas are interrelated, all these ideas are associated in a Renaissance text, any kind of Renaissance text that you read. So all these ideas go into the making of Shakespeare's body of works. Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Andrew Marvell, John Donne, any Renaissance writer or any Renaissance poet or any Renaissance dramatist you read or write about contains these ideas, because British Renaissance was actually an offspring, actually an offshoot of the Italian Renaissance. Renaissance originated in Italy and it was permeated in England. Shakespeare was obviously the greatest Renaissance dramatist. There is no doubt about that. But Shakespeare's dramas, Shakespeare's conceptualization of human psyche, mapping of human psyche, draw heavily from the Italian Renaissance and classical ideas or Aristotelian ideas, and so on and so forth. That's why all these philosophers, Lorenzo Valla, Pico della Mirandola, Aristotle, and Thomas Aquinas, are pertinent for our class. Thank you for attending the class. If you have any question, you can write back to me in the WhatsApp group or to the mail ID that I have, and I will keep on uploading the study materials very soon. Thank you, all of you. Stay safe, stay kind, and stay connected. Thank you.